Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. We have completed every offseason breakdown for every single team in the NBA, so we've most definitely covered your favorite teams. So please go back and watch those. And we do have a comment to read on our short regarding the Lakers, and it's from Deacon's Duty on YouTube, and he said, "I expected for them to sign someone, but no one was really available, and when they tried, they wouldn't sign." Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. We've kind of been, singing that tune ever since free agency really started and ended as well. So, and that, hence
Yeah.
our very poor grades for the Lakers.
Right, yeah, because that's what it comes down to, because they needed to come out of free agency with at least some, option in terms of a physical big man, and then ideally like some type of other two-way guard or wing, and they didn't really get either one. So that's where we got our low grades from.
Yeah. So, a new NBA season does start on Tuesday. So this will be probably a pretty fun episode. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so the NBA season, is upon us. So, you're watching this episode on Monday. The NBA season starts Tuesday, right? And we obviously have a couple of games. You got the defending champion Boston Celtics against the new look New York Knicks. And then you're gonna have, and that's at 7:30. Of course, you're gonna have the ring ceremony, to kick off before the game starts. And then at 10 o'clock, you're gonna have the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? The new look Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Without Cat. And in place Julius Randle and DiVincenzo against the quote unquote new look Lakers, right? Where they have a different coach and they got a couple of young guys that are coming in, but just in terms of this NBA season, right? There's a lot of things to kind of I think look forward to. And so, when we look at what we're expecting over the course of this season, we've kind of seen some things in preseason, right? From the perspective of obviously you got to take preseason with a grain of salt, but we talked about it in the last few episodes where I think there are some teams, that kind of excited us, from what we saw in preseason, just like say like the Phoenix Suns, where they look a lot more professional, they look a lot more competent on the offensive end, which is kind of something that they need to do because they are an offensive oriented team. Um, there's even teams like say like the Knicks, right? Like in the handful of times that they've been able to play, right? There are moments where they look, pretty solid. Obviously, they're missing some key guys right now, but there's a lot to like there. And even with Minnesota, right? Like some of the other ancillary pieces like DiVincenzo, he's looked really good for Minnesota. So, that deal may look even, more impressive for Minnesota compared to what we were thinking before. But I guess, we'll start off with, just like a couple of basic things. So, what, I guess, what are you most kind of excited about, for this season? Whether or not it's a team or a player or some type of storyline, like what's kind of the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, I'm going to say youth. And I know that's kind of a
Mhm.
broad statement, but I feel like multiple things kind of fit under that umbrella. Obviously, the youth and the teams. We have a bunch of young teams that are very hungry. You have some storylines in terms of like revenge, like with the Memphis Grizzlies, Oklahoma City Thunder. They've been the talk of the town recently. And then obviously like players individually, like Wemby and his development. What does he look like in year two? Some other guys that will be up for, most improved and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm really looking forward to. Always the rookies too. That's one of my favorite things is to really watch what these guys look like in year one. So then when, 4 or 5 years down the line, we can kind of look back at that and be like, okay, well, we might have seen this coming, or no, we didn't see this coming at all. So that's kind of my
Yeah.
take on it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point when you talk about the youth because you look around the league and there's so many teams, right, that are kind of led by, young players, right? Like even say a team that probably isn't going to be that great, like the San Antonio Spurs, right? They're led by Victor Wembanyama, right? The
Sure.
number one pick who could be, a top 10 guy this year, right? Even with the Memphis Grizzlies, Josh still young. With Zion, you got Zion in New Orleans. And then even the Celtics guys, right? Like Tatum and Brown. Like obviously they're not 20-year-olds, but they're not 34, 35, towards the end of their careers. So and even like the teams, other teams like Indiana, young team, right?
Yeah.
I guess Orlando, right?
Yeah.
Another young team. So there, I think that's kind of a really good point in terms of a really exciting aspect of uh, the NBA season. I guess for me, it would overall just kind of be talent, where I just
Okay.
think, the level of talent just across the league overall, I think is something that's really exciting to look at. Even like, say, teams that maybe don't necessarily win the title, but they're still going to be really entertaining, which wasn't necessarily the case even like 10, 15 years ago, right?
Hmm.
Say a team like the Houston Rockets, right? Like they could be a play-in team, but they're not going to be like a top 5 seed in the West, I don't think.
Okay.
But I think they're going to be really entertaining to watch. Like I think that's kind of a cool thing to look at just from the perspective of where we are in terms of the development of the NBA. And we've mentioned this multiple times, where even when you look at top 10 lists, right? Like you can easily say that there are more than 10 top 10 players, right? And that kind of speaks to the level of talent across the league. And like you also said, young talent too, right? Because it's not just guys that are, in their late 20s or early 30s or mid 30s, right? It's other guys that, have barely stepped on the NBA court. So I think that's kind of, for me, what I'm mainly looking forward to is just kind of seeing all these really high quality teams. Because I think even though there ultimately probably won't be that many teams that actually have the ability to win the title, there'll be a lot of teams that will still be really good to watch and a lot to look forward to.
Yeah.
But I guess for, a negative, what's one thing that
Mm.
maybe you're either not that excited about or something that you're concerned about? And, again, this could stem from maybe something you saw in the preseason, or it could just stem from, maybe stories you've heard. But what are you thinking?
Um, I might have a hot take here, and maybe something that's not really talked about too much, but
Mhm.
the NBA Cup, I'm kind of worried about that. What does that look like in
Okay.
year 2? Do they improve it? Does it take a step back? I think it's more of like one of those unknowns. Do people even care? I know
Hmm.
some people haven't even really talked about it. I know we haven't talked about it really since they announced the groups or whatever, but that's kind of one thing that I'm looking at, and what steps do they take to improve the overall experience? From all perspectives, from the teams, from the league itself, from the fans' perspective as well. And that would probably be my only one outside of my Wizards being god awful this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's kind of a interesting one that, like you mentioned, is a hot take. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like based off of the changes that they made, that it should, in theory, be better. And it's
Yeah.
not even that the in season tournament last year was bad.
Right.
It just seems like in regards to what they changed, like they made it so that you're not just playing, or like the teams that you can play are a little bit different. So it's not like, even though they're still separated by conferences, it's changing. So it's not like the same team is going to have like the same path every year, so
Sure.
that's nice, right? So I do like a lot of that, so I'm not too worried about the NBA in season cup. But I don't know, like there's a couple of teams where it's like I am a little concerned about. Like I am still concerned about New Orleans, like, and the thing that's annoying is that Zion looks really, really good. It
Hmm.
looks like he's in great shape,
Hmm.
but it still seems like the rest of that team just is in flux. And again, think it still kind of stems from the fact that they were, reportedly trying to trade Brandon Ingram and they just couldn't find a deal for him. And he's
Right.
still there
Right.
and he's still going to have to, play through all of that. And then they still don't really have, a real center. And again, like I'm against some teams on some nights, I guess Herb Jones as your center could could work, against like a smaller team. But what is your option when you play a team like Denver? What is your
Hmm.
option
Hmm.
against a team like Philadelphia, or even like LA, or Boston? I mean, Porzingis, is a capable big. Obviously, he's not like a Jokic or an Embiid, but he's
Any
still
team that has size, for real.
yeah, he's still a guy with size and he can play around the basket.
Right.
So that's something, to kind of think about. With Memphis, there are some questions where, like, in watching them, I don't feel quite like as high about them as I did before. I still think they'll be really good, but I do kind of worry about some of the shooting, just because, like, a lot of their core guys, I don't necessarily know in terms of their outside shots, and some of those guys that could have been rotational guys for them that can shoot, they're hurt, right? I believe Luke Kennard is hurt. if I'm not mistaken, right? Vince Williams, we already know is hurt. Gigi Jackson, we already know is hurt, even though not all those guys were going to be starters, but I think they were all going to play, maybe with the exception of Gigi Jackson, like serviceable roles.
Mhm.
Zach Edey actually looks really good.
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of something that I think where he's kind of, because he was a very polarizing prospect, right? Where like, even like somebody like me, like I had him, in the upper end of the draft,
Right.
right? But like at the same time, I still thought he'd be okay, but he looks pretty good. Obviously he's got all that size and skill around the basket. He doesn't, look overly, slow or unathletic or anything. So I think there's a lot to like there. But yeah, the main concern that I just kind of mentioned is just, New Orleans still kind of looks kind of weird to me just because I just don't like not having a center. Kind of like how last year I didn't like Phoenix not having a point guard.
Okay.
And like I said, it's annoying because of the fact that Zion looks really good. But I still, again, how long is it going to be before he ends up missing X amount of games? Hopefully he doesn't. But, it's just something to think about. But
I um
the
I
in
did
season cup is definitely a
yeah,
hot one though.
I
Yeah.
did want to add to the Memphis thing because it's kind of been in the back of my head since I've been seeing, the clips go viral is Ja getting, kind of tweaking stuff here and there. I hope
Yeah.
that that isn't another sign that we're gonna see, another injury bug hit that team because, I think there's a lot of promise with that team because,
Yeah.
we know how good they were pre-injury and pre-drama. So, I
Mhm.
just did
Yeah.
want to add that with Ja.
Yeah, that initial core when they were healthy, they were one of the best teams, in the Western Conference and
Yeah.
looked like that they had a lot of, potential and promise. But,
Right.
now it's kind of an interesting crossroads where we're going to see, okay, they still have Ja, Desmond Bain and Triple J, but now it's a new group of guys around them and are they going to be able to continue
Right.
that
Right.
upward trajectory that it looked like they were going to have.
Right.
So, so I guess we'll now kind of go into some of the, awards, right? In terms of who we kind of, I guess, are going to win some of these awards. So, I guess, we'll start off with MVP. So,
Mm.
who's your pick for MVP? I guess I'll let you go first.
Oh boy, this is a tough one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you have so many candidates. It's hard for me to pick one of the super young guys because you still do have guys like Jokic, Giannis, Luca as well.
Yeah.
Um, I my brain is telling me to really pick Jokic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because if he puts up numbers remotely like last year, then
Okay.
yeah, he could probably win it. But at the same time, I think I'm gonna zag and I might take Giannis. Um,
Okay.
I think Giannis is gonna have an MVP like season. I'm not saying the Bucks will have like the best record or look like the best team in the league, but I think Giannis will look like a top two player as he normally does.
Okay.
Hopefully if he's healthy. And I think he's just gonna show that he can still dominate and he definitely can still win the Bucks another championship if they put
Mhm.
a better roster around him in terms of, two-way guys, shooters, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm gonna pick Giannis because I think, it's kind of a revenge story for that guy too.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm gonna also definitely not zag, but I'm gonna not pick Jokic either because I just think the thing is with him is I feel like because he's already won
Voter
three,
fatigue, yeah.
right, including what like three of the last five or whatever.
Yeah, it's gonna be voter
Um,
fatigue, right?
yeah, I feel like there's gonna be some voter fatigue.
Mhm.
So, but I think so it I feel like it may come down to possibly like you said like the trio of Giannis, SGA and Luca. I'm gonna just pick Luca because I think for Dallas, I think they can still be as long as they're like a top four seed, 50-win team. Gonna probably continue to put up the stats he's been putting up.
Okay.
Obviously, that Dallas has made, some changes to the roster. They brought in Klay Thompson, they brought in Quentin Grimes, but they didn't really bring anybody in where, it's like a star that's going to take away, a lot of possessions from Luca. So I feel like the combination of him having a good team with good players around him, and he's going to, but not like necessarily all NBA outside of maybe Kyrie. I think that if he can get to the top four and still give you like 38 and 10, that'll probably be enough to get him the MVP.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm fully acknowledging. Of course, there's a world where OKC, if they win like 60 games, and SGA is like still putting up his really good stats because he was an MVP finalist last year as well. if they win like 60 games, he could probably get it too.
Yeah.
So,
Did you have any like dark horse candidates where like you
hmm.
kind of have them stashed away? Because mine would be like a guy like Anthony Edwards.
um,
Um,
I think Brunson honestly could still be a dark horse MVP candidate because
yeah.
I think we both expect the Knicks to be pretty good. Um, and I think if their win total is similar to what it was last year and standings wise, they're like top 3 in the Eastern Conference, he could definitely get consideration. I don't see him winning it. But I do think that he's got a, that he could be one of those dark horse guys where it's
Okay.
like, let's say one of those guys, because this always happens every year. Let's say one of those guys gets hurt and maybe either doesn't play enough or maybe down like the final stretch they just miss time. Um, and then it ends up being like not like a sympathy MVP, right? But like just like, okay, this person closed the season better than the others, so we're gonna give it to them because we
Sure.
know that like injuries are gonna happen, things are gonna happen like
Mm-hmm.
that. But
Mm-hmm.
I have Luka.
Okay.
So after that, this one I feel like maybe the most difficult one possibly is
Okay.
Rookie of the Year.
Oh boy.
Who the heck do we have for Rookie of the Year? Because I think there are a lot of different options that you could go with. Because as we know with this draft class, there's not necessarily anybody that is coming in with superstar potential right out of the gate. Maybe they end up being that. But as of right now, we don't know. Also, many of these top picks may not necessarily start, so they may not necessarily play the minutes required to be able to get, whatever stats you need. But who do you have right now for Rookie of the Year? Because, like I said, I feel like this is an incredibly difficult one where I feel like you could argue like 5 different guys, and I don't think anybody would really disagree. Compared to like say like last year, where it was like it's one guy.
Yeah, I think there might be like 6 or 7 guys that you could really
Mm-hmm.
mark down for this award, and I think it's wide open, pretty much like you
Mm-hmm.
said. But I think you do have to think smart about it. You can't just pick, any old rookie. Um, and I'm gonna pick Zach Edey. I think he's in the best position for to succeed. If I'm keeping it real, because I think with him being on Memphis, him being around a guy like Ja Morant, I think he's going to replace the Steven Adams effect. And I think if he does that to a certain extent, while also showcasing some other things that he can do as well, I think he could be a solid pick for that. At the same time, I do also want to pick Sarr because I feel like he might have like the freedom to do whatever the heck he wants because
Mm-hmm.
Washington is just a crapshoot. So like that is also in the back of my mind, but I'm kind of teetering and tottering between the two of those. But I think since Zach Edey's in a better position to succeed than Sarr, considering
Mm-hmm.
who he has giving him the ball, then yeah, I would say Zach Edey's probably not clear favorite, but a good favorite pick.
Yeah, I had Zach Edey as
Okay,
well, funny
figured
enough.
figured.
And again, it's a lot of it is for the reasons you said, just for the fact that he's going to be able to slide in with a well-defined role. Presumably he's going to start. Now the difference is that compared to some of these other teams, he won't necessarily be like, a number one option. But again,
Mhm.
most of these rookies won't be number one options anyways. But again, we know he's going to start and we know he's going to play. The question is how many minutes will he play? And then of course, how many nights will he be able to have like, oh, this is a mismatch night. The other team is really small, so we can just basically spam giving him the ball around the basket like every time.
Right.
Um, and that's probably I think going to happen like on a decent amount of nights. Because I just think the other ones there's uncertainties. There's been a lot of buzz for Reed Shepard for Rookie of the Year, and I understand that as well because of the fact that we know he'll play a decent amount as well. We know he's going to have the ball in his hands. Unlike some of these other rookies, and we know he'll presumably put up some solid numbers right in that with that second unit. So I think he's probably another really good option as well.
Yeah.
But I think like with Edie, just because of the fact that he's gonna start, I think like people will kind of see how he's playing for Memphis, and I think that's kind of where I have the edge. But again, like you said, it's kind of teetering and tottering back and forth, and it wouldn't shock me at all if Reed Shepard won it because he's been really good. Since he's been drafted for Houston, both in summer league and in preseason, and I feel like for him, it probably will be easier to put up some of these other stats as a guard because he'll actually have the ball in his hands. But either way, we'll see.
Yeah, I think that makes 100% sense. I think Reed Shepard Solid pick for that award as well. I I think the only one that I probably would say isn't a good pick, among the lottery guys is probably Risa Share because I don't know what he's really going to
Yeah.
look like, which is kind of funny considering he's
Mhm.
the number one pick. But like a guy like Cody Williams, I could just see a lot of these guys. I just need to really see what kind of situations they're going to be in. Like, are they going to start things like that? But for the
Yeah.
guys like Zach Edey and Reed Shepard, I feel like it's kind of like a no brainer.
Right. Yeah. And again, that's kind of and that's kind of the wild thing, right? That the number one pick isn't necessarily considered, the odds-on favorite to win Rookie of the Year.
Right,
But
right.
again, it's that kind of draft, so it's just kind of something to think about.
Yeah.
Um, Now, next up, Defensive Player of the Year. I guess we can go with that one. I feel like that one is not quite as difficult to really. Obviously, there's a lot of different options, but I feel like there's one guy that seems like a guy that probably is like an odds-on favorite to win it. So I'll just go first. I'll say Wemby.
Yep. That's mine too.
Because of the fact, yeah, because of the fact that again, last year led the league in blocks when he was on the floor. The Spurs were, an above-average defensive team. Again, I don't necessarily know how much better they will be defensively. I mean, they'll probably be better. But I just don't necessarily know how good of a team that they'll actually be. But I don't think I don't think they have to be an elite team to make the playoff, or excuse me, to win Defensive Player of the Year.
Mm-mm.
But I think as long as he puts up the numbers he's been putting up defensively and it continues to improve, I think it's probably his to lose because I don't think Gobert is going to get it again. Even though Minnesota will be a much better defensive team, probably I'm sure. And then Anthony Davis, I don't think the Lakers team, is going to be good enough defensively. And, again, obviously, if you're a really good defensive player, it shouldn't matter. But I just don't think they're going to give it to him because I don't think the team's going to win enough games. Giannis, I mean, he tends to be kind of hanging around, so maybe he gets it. But I don't know. I feel like Wemby's feels like he could be, he could be on track to get it and get it multiple times from here on out. But it wouldn't shock me if like somebody else got it, but it would kind of surprise me.
Yeah, I think he's gonna probably average 4 blocks a game for real.
Yeah.
He's they said he's weighing in at like 235 pounds, so
Mhm.
he bulked up. He definitely got stronger. And he looks the part, on both ends of the floor, and I think that's really gonna be the key to success here. Is um, how can he continue to impact shots at the crazy rate that he was last year? And I think it's going to carry over for sure. And I think people are very low on some of the other candidates like Gobert. I don't think people are as high on
Right.
after seeing the numbers and the stats that Wemby put up, and especially like the clips and highlights and stuff. So yeah, I think his switchability is also a key thing as well. I mean, we already know what the guy can do, and it's similar to 80 as well. But like you said, I think uh, that guy is just a walking unit, and he's a defensive unit on himself. So I think Wemby's got this one, clear cut favorite.
Yeah. Right. Next up, six man of the year.
Mm.
Right. I feel like this is another one that could kind of go in a number of different directions. Just because of the fact that number of guys on a lot of teams, that can come off the bench and can make an impact, in multiple ways. So, last year, right, it was Nas Reed, right, for the Minnesota Timberwolves. But I feel like this year, again, it'll probably change. Just because that award tends to be, you know, it just kind of tends to be like which guy off the bench, kind of gets hot and has the best season. But for you, what are you kind of thinking as your early, I guess, favorite for six man of the year?
Might be a hot take because I was
Mm-hmm.
kind of teetering between Malik Monk or
Mm-hmm.
DiVincenzo, but I think I'm gonna go with
Mm-hmm.
DiVincenzo because it's a new situation. It's a change of scenery. Minnesota's bench is pretty dang good. And I think him being able to be in that second unit potentially is going to be awesome. Um, alongside a guy like Nas Reed, I think they're really just going to be able to help each other out, and I think their depth is going to be like sneaky elite in the Western Conference. So, um, yeah, and I feel like every situation that's kind of come his way in terms of changing scenery has pretty much worked out for him. At the end of the day, like
Mm-hmm.
he was balling out in New York in the postseason. We saw what he was able to do in Golden State, kind of rehab that value coming off Milwaukee. So overall, I think I think he's gonna have not like a career year, but I think he's gonna be solid and definitely show like the solid impact that he's going to have for the Timberwolves bench.
Yeah, I think you know what? I think that's kind of like a really good, I guess zag, because like you said, the fact that he'll still play like a pretty decent role for his team,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I mean, and like you said, he's going to come off the bench. I'm sure he'll close in a number of these games.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's a really good pick. The
Yeah.
Monk one, I feel like maybe I am kind of curious because that kind of was who I was leaning towards, at least as of right now. But at the same time, like, and that is my pick, but like at the same time, I could see his numbers not necessarily be bad, but I feel like with the addition of DeRozan,
Mm-hmm.
like it could be his numbers could be a little bit worse just because of the fact that like I'm sure there will be possessions where the second unit DeRozan will play and then maybe Malik Monk is out there as well. But if Sacramento maybe gets a few more wins, like that could be possible as well. And again, like some of these awards, the win shouldn't necessarily matter. Like Rookie of the Year, wins should never matter for Rookie of the Year because half the time the top rookies are usually on horrible teams, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of different picks there. But I guess I'm gonna settle for Malik Monk because I feel like I thought he was gonna win it last year and he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like his numbers will probably still be relatively similar coming off the bench.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a safe pick. But I think the DiVincenzo one is a good one too. Is there a possible dark horse? Maybe a Buddy Hield, possibly. Could that be interesting?
My dark horse was Naz Reid. I thought he could potentially
Okay.
go back to back, just because.
Yeah, another safe pick.
Yeah, like he's gonna be doing the same thing as last year, but maybe
Hmm.
at an even higher rate because there's no more
Right.
Towns. Um, so maybe we could see them pair up Julius Randle and Naz Reid, and
Hmm.
I think that could potentially open up some more opportunities for the guy. So that would kind of be my other guy, but I know that's not really a dark horse. That's just kind of like my second or third option outside of Malik Monk and DiVincenzo. So I
Yeah.
guess I kind of went with the dark horse in DiVincenzo at the end of the day, right?
Right. And that's also kind of wild that you're talking about a team that has possibly two Six-Man of the Year
There you go.
candidates on it, right? Which,
Right.
again, that's pretty wild. What about most improved? Because I feel like that's one where, there are a number of options that you could pick.
Mm.
And we know like usually for most improved, it tends to be, the younger guys, that take a leap forward. But I guess the question is, which younger guys maybe do we think could take a leap forward and enough to be able to win most improved? Because, I think some of it will be like guys that will just have increased roles, but we're still going to have to hope and pray that they put up, better numbers.
I'm going with probably a sneaky pick because I know everybody's raving over J-Dub. I know like everybody's picking him, but I'm probably gonna
Mhm.
go with Evan Mobley. I think if he can defensively stay about the same, if not get slightly better, but if that shooting, becomes legit and viable, I think that'll open up the floor for his team. And I think not to say that it's a team award, but I think you do have to look at it from that perspective where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, you improved, dramatically individually, but if you can take your team to the next level alongside that improvement, then I think,
Mhm.
you should automatically win it. And I'm kind of expecting like a surge in his numbers, like efficiency, all that stuff. So that's my pick.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's, honestly like a good pick just, from the perspective of like, it's a guy who's good but isn't like an all-star, but if he goes from what he is right now to an all-star, then that's probably, that might be good enough. Funny enough, that was also my
Well,
pick
that was
as
yours as
well.
well. Okay.
Evan Mobley, because I think we both talked about many times that we like Evan Mobley.
Yeah, we're Evan
We
Mobley
believe in
fans over here for
yeah,
sure.
we believe in his abilities, we believe in his you know, ascendance
Yeah.
and whatnot. So I think that that's a really good guy to go with.
Yep.
Are there other guys that we potentially think may be, possible dark horses, other than like a Jalen Williams? Because like, you know, say when you look at the Vegas odds, right? Like there are guys like Wemby is one of the odds
Yeah.
on favorites right now. But I mean, I feel like he was already like so good that I mean, like I don't know if they're gonna give him most improved because I
Right.
mean he's already like basically borderline all star. Um, then there's also like guys like Josh Giddey, Jonathan Kaminga, Jalen Johnson as well. As you already mentioned, Williams and Mobley. And then there's like a couple other guys on there where I feel like, again, they're already kind of at like a really high level. Like Paolo, I think, is already really
Too
good.
high.
RJ Barrett is there as well, interestingly enough. I mean, like he'll have increased opportunities. And like that's an example of like, a guy who could be, he'll have more opportunities, with this roster and, because there's not as much talent. We've talked about the Raptors in our previous offseason
Mhm.
video, but regardless, either way. But I think those are some interesting picks. I just feel like Wemby, he's too good already. I think. I mean, we
Yeah,
know he's
agreed.
going to be better, but I just feel like he's already so good that I feel like somebody else is going to get it.
Yeah, it's damn near disrespectful to kind of have him in this freaking this list, in my opinion. But I guess for a dark horse, Cade,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah. I
maybe
mean, like,
that's a good one,
and like,
right?
right, and like you said, that's a good one as well because I think most people expect the Pistons to be better, right? Like maybe we don't expect them to be a playoff team, but I don't think we expect them to only win 14 games again. I would hope
Right,
not.
right.
So now this one to me, like I hate this award so much,
Mm,
not because of what it is, but just
mm,
because like it's just so dumb. But
mm,
clutch player of the year.
mm.
Um, who in the world do we think is gonna win that? I mean, there are so many different options that we could go with. I think I remember last year. I thought I remember saying like my pick was Steph, and like
The West.
somehow he actually won it,
Yeah.
which is just nuts. But my initial reasoning wasn't quite. It wasn't quite exactly spot on because I thought part of it might be because Chris Paul would help get him some good looks, but no, I mean that was part of it, but not really. So
Yeah.
I mean, either way, who's your clutch player of the year candidate? Because I mean, this one is just like, who knows? I mean,
Jokic.
there are guys that I think you said Jokic.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, more opportunities.
Yes. Because like you kind of have to think of it like this. That award is so phony in my opinion because does it really mean a whole lot? Like I don't know how to feel about it because think about the year that Steph won it, right? Their record,
Mhm.
because he won it last year, right?
Yeah, it was last season.
Yeah, their record wasn't that good, which means they're
And also,
they're in a ton of freaking close games. So
yeah,
if people, what's up?
and even in crunch time, like they didn't win most of those games. It's just his numbers in
Right,
crunch time were elite.
right.
But as a crunch time team, they were basically, I think they, like you said, half their games were in crunch time, and they won like maybe slightly less than half of them.
Yeah, and like I think if Denver's gonna take the step back that a lot of the NBA media and people have been
Hmm.
talking about, then I'm gonna assume that Jokic is gonna have, like you said at the beginning, like a ton of opportunities to kind of, dominate in the fourth quarter like he always has. Like last year, I think he was like fourth in total clutch
Yeah,
points or something like
yeah,
that. So
he was still one of the most clutch players in the league last
yeah,
year too.
so it wouldn't
So
surprise me if they get tired of him, winning MVP and just give him, the weirdest
give
award
him
in the
another,
league. It's a weird
give him
award.
something.
Because how
Yeah,
do you quantify
exactly.
that? Like last year,
I
I
know.
picked DeRozan, I think,
Hmm.
and it's like you can make a case for both of those guys to win the award,
Hmm.
Steph and DeRozan, but it really
Yeah,
all comes down to, I guess, perception. So
yeah. Um, I'll just pick Jalen Brunson.
okay,
Only because I feel like he'll have the ball in his hands a lot in crunch time. And I think the Knicks have some options they can go to, like in terms of, like the pick and pop with Towns. Obviously, you have the other guys you can play through as well. But we know that, in crunch time, the ball is going to be in Brunson's hands. And I think he'll be a big part of why they're going to be able to win a lot of those close games down the stretch. Because that's what he was doing last year. Obviously, it's a different team because, there's some guys that have, moved on and new guys that are coming in. But it's still going to be Brunson's team, and I think it will probably be, I mean, maybe not quite the same as what it was in the postseason last because they do have more talent, but, it's still going to run and finish by and large with him. So I think, if the Knicks presumably win games like we expect them to, a big part of that is going to be their ability to win, in crunch time. I mean, they'll still be good enough that not every game's going to be a close game like the Warriors, but, I still think that in the moments that matter, he could get it. But to be fair, maybe you have to play an X amount of crunch time. I don't know because like I think DeRozan was second last year. The Bulls weren't necessarily great either. But he was really good in those closing minutes. So,
Yeah.
that's my pick. But again, fully acknowledge that this one is a weird one. I feel like the Steph one I got borderline lucky, but,
It is
still.
what it is, man.
Yeah. And part of crunch time, to be honest, is kind of luck.
For sure, yeah.
But then after that, coach of the year.
Mm.
Now, who do we think? Usually with coach of the year, generally speaking, it tends to be, somebody who's coaching either one of the best teams in the league, or sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it can be like a team that has a really good story, right? But I feel like there's gonna, like Mark Dagnall won it last year, but the Thunder were really good. They were the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, right? And then, we obviously know in previous years, right, like a Michael Malone won it. And others have won it in the past as well. But, who do you think could win it this year? Because I feel like you have a number of options that you could go to. And I feel like this one may be a little bit trickier than usual.
I've seen a lot of people talk about Taylor Jenkins. I'm not gonna pick him though. Probably gonna go with Joe Mazzulla.
Yeah.
I think the stigma is gone about that guy not knowing what he's doing. I think, they're probably gonna be top of the East. And he's as he said, I'm pretty sure he's called himself a freak when it comes to basketball. Like he freaking lives, breathes this stuff. Talking about stats, he can recall plays. It's crazy. So
go on.
No, I was just gonna say, like, he's addicted to basketball. The passion is there. I think it's rubbed off on the team as a whole. You can see, like, they really do believe in him. And obviously the unit is crazy, like, the team that they have. But, I think it all starts at the top. So I'm gonna go with him.
And I was gonna say, like, I remember there was like a thing I was reading online a while back, and it was like a challenge where it was like you had to guess whether or not the quote from Joe Mazzulla was an actual quote or an AI quote.
Right.
Like auto-generated.
Right.
And there were times where you couldn't tell which was which. Like, I'm not going to obviously go back and like read all of them, but
sure.
If you've been paying attention, like some of his quotes, are wild, right? Like the one where he said, like usually they say that teams have a target on their backs. Hopefully we got one right between our eyes, which is like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
He was my pick too as well. Okay. Because when you look at the Boston Celtics, I think they're still going to win a bunch of games just like last year, right? Maybe they don't win 64, but I think they'll still probably win somewhere around a similar amount. And like you said, I think the stigma's gone. I think he's shown he's one of the elite coaches in the game, and I think that he's going to be able to get this one because they'll still have, I think, the best record in the NBA, even, unless Tatum or Brown miss a bunch of time.
Going back to Taylor Jenkins, I think that's a solid pick as well because, like you said, there's always the narrative side and being the best side, and I think the narrative with Memphis is they're going to have a comeback story, but, the problem is they actually have to do that. If they don't, then Taylor Jenkins isn't a candidate. So I think, preseason pick is definitely like Jenkins because I think, if they do have a really, really good freaking season led by him and, we kind of see them go back to that, top 5 team in the West, then, yeah, for sure, I think he definitely deserves a spot there.
Right. And like you said, that's a good point where again, like there's a different guy that's going to win it, like you're not usually going to win it every year. Like say like even the year before, right? It was Mike Brown that won it and they were, to be fair, 3 seed in the Western Conference, right? But there were other teams that were ahead of them, right? Where you could have potentially given it to them. Cause like Taylor Jenkins could have won it cause they were the 2 seed.
Yeah. He finished in second
Michael Malone. Yeah, Michael Malone could have won it because they were the 1 seed, or even out in the East, right? I mean, the Celtics, right, were I think the 2 seed, right? The Bucks were 1, although Budenholzer wouldn't have gotten it again. But either way, that's usually what happens. I mean, like I do feel like more often than not, it tends to be one of the top teams. But either way, like there's always that narrative one that could sneak in there. But I just feel like the winning one, like you said, because Mazzulla didn't get it. I feel like it's his time now. But I also acknowledge, like, with the Celtics, like, they had been a really good team before him anyways. So maybe some people might hold that against them. Right. But, still, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like, he's shown he can coach.
Yeah, I think he's broken past the barrier,
Yeah. So, you know, now, I mean, I guess now we kind of get to the big piece, right? In terms of, I guess, as for now, championship predictions. Um, and again, like there's a lot of really good teams in the NBA this year, and I think that there's going to be opportunity for some of these teams, to be able to, have at least a chance to be able to win the title. Maybe they don't necessarily win it, because I think a lot of times there tends to be less teams that actually have a shot than we think, right? Because like usually it ends up just being one of the top seeds. But again, there's a lot of teams that I think if things break their way, they could pull it off. But as of right now, where are you leaning towards your early championship pick? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Knicks on this one.
Okay.
I know a lot of people are kind of swaying in that direction, so I'm not really like following the wave, but it's more so I just feel like this team is assembled for a reason. We already know what that reason is, and it's to defeat Boston. And I think they're really the only team that's standing in the way of kind of Boston's repeat potential repeat or whatever. And I think what they've been able to do and what they've been able to craft and what they sacrificed and the gains that they've gotten back, give them
Mm-hmm.
a this is a championship roster in my opinion. You're
Mm-hmm.
giving Jalen Brunson pretty much the entire court to work with. This is the first time we're going to see this iteration of the offense 5 out. You still got some hustle guys. You still got some great perimeter defenders as well. Obviously, like OG Anunoby, McCall Bridges, Josh Hart. And then, you add Towns into the mix offensively. And I think it's just a recipe for success. The only thing that I feel like could, hurt them is probably going to be, health potentially and what the minutes are going to look like. And obviously, it's not a very deep team, but, when you're top heavy like that, and I think a guy like Jalen Brunson continues to improve, and the league hasn't really found a way to slow him down unless he's hurt. Alongside a guy like Karl Anthony Towns, I think, like I said, it's most likely a recipe for success alongside,
Mm-hmm.
those elite wings that were practically brought in to slow down Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown.
Yeah. And again, like I think we're both definitely on the same page that I think the Knicks are the team I think in the Eastern Conference that I think have the best chance to upset,
Mm-hmm.
the Boston Celtics, because I still think the Celtics are the favorite in the East.
Mm-hmm.
With Philly, I have concerns about their health even more so than New York, just
Mm-hmm.
because, they're two of their three best players, because I think Maxi right now probably is a little bit better than George, even though they're both really good.
Yeah.
Um, but but that's kind of where that concerns me. And then with the Bucks, they're still obviously in the mix as well. But I'm just not quite sure about the group around Giannis. It just
Sure.
feels like they may be a little bit over the hill, possibly. Could be wrong, but that's kind of where I stand. Whereas with the Knicks, I think you have the wings, and you do have the offensive threat that and you have Towns, right, who can size wise match up with Porzingis and he can space the floor. For now, I'm still going to stick with Boston. I do think that by and large, I think that given how great they were in the regular season last year, combined with the level of talent that they still have, because they didn't really lose any key guys, right? I mean, who was the only guy they lost? I think it was O'Shea Brissett, right? Not really as big of a rotational player as some of the other guys.
Sure.
And there's still a potential for Tatum and Brown to improve as well. And, I think their guards and the fact that they have Tatum and Brown, you have a bunch of guys that could all kind of take turns guarding Jalen Brunson. I know they don't necessarily have like an inside physical center, but Porzingis kind of does do that now, right? Where he is willing to post up and play, like a 7-3 guy, as
Yes.
opposed to the guy, that he kind of had a bad reputation for earlier in his career.
Yes.
Obviously for them, health could be a thing too. More so for Porzingis though, because Tatum and Brown, generally speaking, are very durable. Or whatever you want to call them, superstar tandem, whatever you want to say. And then I just look at it from the perspective of I think with the Knicks, I still feel like I need them to have another option in the front court, aside from what they have, just because it seems like Mitchell Robinson, we don't know when he's coming back. We know he will at least be out through December, right? Like he's supposed to not come back until at the earliest January, which could be longer than that. Precious Achua, right, who's another possible backup option. He just got hurt. He's going to be out for a couple of weeks with a hamstring injury. Not quite as serious as the Robinson piece, but that's the part that concerns me. The bench concerns me a little bit because it's a lot of guards and not really a lot of bigs. But I think they'll still be able to find ways to win. But I think it's more so a playoff team. Like I could see them not being bad in the regular season, but I could see them maybe not winning as many regular season games as maybe somebody else, but being more of a threat. You know
Sure.
what I mean? So
Sure.
I think the Knicks are pretty well poised, to be able to do it. But I think Boston might be able to get it done in terms of back to back. But again, Porzingis needs to be healthy by the time the playoffs come around because I don't necessarily know if they're going to be able to have back to back luck in terms of not really playing any healthy teams. Obviously, Porzingis wasn't healthy, but the East is better. But
Yeah.
I at the same time, I don't necessarily know if there's anybody in the West as of yet that makes me, if I'm Boston, really horrified or scared or worried about their odds. I mean, of course, there are teams that I think that could challenge them, but those teams have to get there. And I think Boston has a better chance of getting to the finals than those teams in the like. I think Denver could potentially challenge Boston because of the interior play, but their path to the finals is also pretty difficult because
Yeah.
there's a lot of good teams in the West, and I don't personally think that they've improved enough to the point where I would, where they were a couple years ago, where you felt like, oh yeah, they're ahead of everybody. They're
Yeah.
not that anymore. Yeah. So,
100%.
and sorry if people are kind of wondering why I'm looking over at the screen. It's just because the WNBA Finals is going on, and it's the last, game of the season, right? Championship on the line. So if anybody was kind of wondering what was going on, that's what was happening there. But
All good. All
yeah, in
good.
terms of it should be a great regular season, I think. Just from the perspective of a lot of really good teams, a lot of young guys to look forward to. Even some of the veteran guys, right? There's still a lot of cool stuff about them, right? Like some of the Olympic guys, they're still really good.
Yeah.
Maybe their teams don't win the title, but I think those individual players, there's still a lot to look forward to from that perspective. But I think this is going to be a really good season. But I feel like it's going to be. I don't think the Celtics will in the playoffs run through it like they did last postseason, but I do think that as of right now they have the edge. But again, I'm very open to the idea of somebody, being able to make a run and possibly pulling off the upset because of the fact that we still need to know more about the Porzingis situation, and I think they do need him to be healthy this time around because they didn't have to play any teams where you had to have him in order to win.
Right.
Just because like they were just flat out better than all the other teams they played, and that was part of the reason why we picked them to win the finals. We thought they might need Porzingis against Dallas, but they really didn't.
No,
So
they really didn't, and I think that's a testament to how good they truly are. At the end of the day, and I don't blame you
yeah,
for picking the Celtics, but I think we've kind of realized now how hard it is really to go back to back and how rare
right,
of a case that really is for a lot of these teams. So I think it's going to be somebody different than Boston. Hence why I picked
yeah,
New York. But at the end of the day, like even if New York doesn't win it, I still don't think Boston's going to win it. I just don't see them going back to back.
yeah. Now I guess the question is, do we have a backup team? We're not backup because that sounds like a cop out. But let's say like, who's the next team up, right? In terms of like, okay, this team doesn't win it, but like, who's the next best team where you're like, okay, if the team that I picked doesn't win it, this team has the next best shot. And again, we're not copping out because, like I said, last year it annoyed me so much that I picked the Celtics to win the title going into the year, then changed it going into the playoffs. It annoys me still to this day because I hate being wrong in aspects like that. But either way, just in terms, or let's shake it up. How about a dark horse? Maybe that's a little bit better.
Okay. Dark horse, I would go with Phoenix. The top end talent is really freaking heavy for them. I think having a guy like Kevin Durant on the team obviously is going to make you a contender no matter what. And then you add in Booker into the mix, Beal. They look better. They've gotten the point guards, the guard room situated. They've got a young guy in Ryan Dunn. They just look more like a serious team that can actually contend for something. Not to say like that I think they're going to be amazing, in the postseason, but I would say like dark horse back of my mind team that I'm thinking of, like it wouldn't surprise me if they won it out of nowhere.
Yeah, Washington perhaps.
Washington, what? The Wizards? Boy, ain't no way. No. They could contend for the title of the garbage can, but not the NBA Finals.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, but I do think that Phoenix is kind of like a decent dark horse, to pick from the perspective of like, cuz like a lot of the other teams that we're talking about in the West, like Denver I kind of have as a dark horse right now, but at the same time, it feels so, weird to have them as a dark horse
Mhm.
just because of the fact that, like, they were the favorites or co-favorites a year ago.
Mhm.
And now they basically kind of just trended back towards the darkness again, right?
Mhm.
Where like now nobody believes in them. It seems like they have a 0% shot. And it just seems like that they've probably trended downwards.
Mhm.
They still, I think, have one of the top players in the game, if not the best player in the game.
Yes.
But and I think that that gives you a shot. But again, I can't pick them like I would feel like, like I would in terms of Boston, because Boston didn't really need to improve. Denver, I feel like needed to improve, and I'm just not really quite sold that the moves that they made are going to be improvements come playoff time. Maybe they could be improvements regular season wise, possibly, but it seems like most people don't expect them to even win that many regular season games compared
Right.
to what they had been doing. So, but again, I'm still kind of holding on to them possibly being a dark horse, maybe a revenge season because of what happened in last year's playoffs with Jamal Murray and how he just kind of fell apart at the end. And I think he will have a bounce back postseason because regular season he was fine. So right now I think that's who I have.
Okay. No, that's solid. I don't blame you for that one.
Right. It just, like I said, it just feels so bizarre to have them as a dark horse because I think they're still viewed as a contender. But it just
Mhm.
seems like, but it just feels like as of right now that people are, I think, a little too low on Denver. But I do understand moving away from them. Yeah.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it looks like this series just wrapped up. So it looks like the New York pulled it off after losing in the finals last year. So they were able to, pull off, after losing that game one upset, right? Right at the end, they were able to bounce back and, they pulled it off. They had some interesting performances over the course of the game, but, again, the
Yeah.
WNBA season is over. And it's funny how they always end like right before the NBA season comes up. So,
Yep. Yeah. Shout out to New
so
York. Shout out to
yeah.
Sabrina too. Like, she put up a crazy historic
Who?
game winner. Huh?
Oh, you said Sabrina?
Yeah, crazy game
Yeah,
winner.
that was the person that had the interesting performance in this game.
I bet. Yeah, but that game
Yeah.
winner, I think it was what, game 4 or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, like exactly. Like if people go back and look at the moment that they may have won the series, like that game
Oh, for
might have been
sure.
where they won. Yeah,
Yeah.
because in this game she shot like 1 for 20. Like I'm not even kidding. Yeah,
Okay.
but like either way, it's all good.
Mm.
Again, we know weird performances happen all the time. Where like people don't shoot as well, but like their impact on the game was still positive. But
Yeah.
again, John Cole Jones saved the day as well as some others.
W.
But either way, back to the NBA. Uh, so I mean, yeah, in terms of our season predictions and awards and whatnot, this is kind of where we're at right now. And again, um, obviously the season hasn't even started yet. So we know that there are a lot of factors that could easily change. Things like injury, of course, things like trades. Um, and just sometimes things just end up not being as good as we thought or end up being a lot better than we thought. So, you know, it happens, but as of right now, I think we're at the very least kind of on point in terms of the teams that we think are going to be legitimate contenders, like
Yeah.
in terms of who we expect to be there at the end of the day. Um, but again, with the Knicks, that would be kind of wild if they ended up, pulling off like, a possible like, you got NBA, obviously the WNBA, they just pulled off the title. Baseball, we'll see what
Mhm.
happens there with the
Mhm.
Yankees, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, unfortunately, you got a couple other New York teams that aren't necessarily doing as great, right? But
Yeah.
including one that shares the same arena with the New York Liberty.
Right,
But
right. It's crazy.
but either way, um, we'll see what happens. But yeah, with the Knicks, yeah, what a crazy time to be a New York sports fan, anyways, just because of
For
the
real.
fact that you got teams to root for now that have because again, even if you don't think the Knicks will win the title, it wouldn't surprise me if the Knicks were able to make a deep run. Like I said, I am concerned about some of the depth, but I think, like you said, the talent up top with Brunson and the other pieces around him, I think that it's very clear that they're laser focused on trying to take out Boston. It's just obviously, with Minnesota, the only issue for them is they were laser focused on taking out Denver, and then they ended up not matching up quite as well. But I think with the Knicks, I think their offense won't be quite as big of a problem as Minnesota because I just think Brunson is probably like just further along in his development than Edwards is, and he already kind of, even though he's a scoring point guard, he has more natural passing instincts. So I don't think you'll have quite as many scenarios where the offense is kind of mucked up.
Yeah, there won't
And
be
I
as
think
much growing pains.
right. Like I am higher, I think, on the Knicks than Minnesota, but I wouldn't say I'm low on Minnesota. I think it would be more likely that the Knicks could pull it off than Minnesota.
Sure,
Uh,
sure, agreed.
but either way, we'll see. But like you said, it's very difficult to win back to back because we learned that the hard way last year with Denver.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. I do feel like Boston could pull it off, but it is going to be really difficult. And there are other factors that I can understand in terms of not picking them, where like there's going to probably be an ownership change. Jaylen Brown might not be happy about the Olympic stuff,
Mm.
and then obviously are guys going to be quite as willing to make the sacrifices they made last season, right? Compared to this season, where it's like, well, we just won a title. I want my shots. But, I do think that the way that they play is pretty transferable from year to year. But, either way, this time they need Porzingis to be healthy.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. I think that's a
will he
guarantee.
ever be healthy? Probably not. But, we'll see.
No.
So, now in terms of news, rumors around the NBA, as we already mentioned, right? Like, things are, things are kind of on the up and up in terms of the NBA. So, we just got actually something going on before we recorded about about an extension with Moses Moody. Apparently, he's getting ready to sign a 3-year, $39 million rookie contract extension, right? His agent, Rich Paul of Clutch Sports, talked about that. So, he's under team control. Anthony Slater said he is still trade eligible this season, but outgoing salary count says 5.8 million, incoming as 11. He's got the poison pill thing. If you haven't heard of that, right? That's when a guy signs a rookie extension and, the money gets sent out as less than the actual total, but it comes into the other team as more. So it makes a trade a little bit more difficult to pull off. And so that's why, it's called a poison pill provision or whatever. So I'm curious to see what happens because with the Warriors, right, there was a lot of talk about in the offseason all the trade stuff that they could pull off. And they ended up not doing that. They ended up just, acquiring some guys in free agency. And now they re-signed Moody. We'll see if they do it with Kuminga. My guess is for him, sounds like rumors wise, that's probably not coming before the season starts. That's probably more of an off-season thing. Or possibly he could be, I feel like he's probably their best trade asset. So I don't expect one from him. But the Moody one, it is interesting because his playing time has been so up and down where, there are some games and stretches where the guy doesn't play at all. But then there's other times where, they can't take him off the floor. And I think he's a good player. But, I do wonder if there's a guy on this roster, if there is a deal where there's some type of sacrifice or some type of, whatever being made. But, I like him as a rotational piece. I think he can play on any team. It's just there's so many guys on this team and so many guards that I do wonder, like, if you give him this contract, he almost kind of has to play minutes. And
Yeah.
so, I just wonder, assuming he plays, right, whose minutes are gonna go away. And, all the guards that they have, I feel like they're all gonna play. Like Steph, Melton, Heald, Moody, Pajemski. I mean, like all those guys are gonna get minutes. I mean, Peyton, I guess he'll probably play more like wing,
Yeah.
because especially like on offense they use him as a big. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think about it? Because again, money wise, it's fine. Certainly not a crazy amount by any stretch. But I just feel like if that's the case, he's gonna need to be a bigger part of the rotation.
Yeah, and it's funny. These kind of situations kind of always make me ponder, like, what if this guy wasn't on this team? What if he was on a different situation where, maybe he gets a crap ton of minutes and he looks like a completely different player? Then I could probably talk
Yeah.
about a contract like this a little bit better. But for this context, it's tough because I haven't really seen a whole lot, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it or anything like that. It's just I'm saying, like,
Mhm.
I don't know how to kind of grade this contract because
Mhm.
I do understand you want to retain, your I guess quote unquote valuable asset, but that asset has to prove to be valuable in the first place. So I'm not too high on a guy like Moses Moody where I think like he's like the next big thing or anything like that. But, I mean, like you
Mhm.
said, solid money, solid contract. So, you know, I guess I can't really hate it at all.
Right. Because that's the thing is that like it's not that much money.
Hmm.
And that's why like the extension for Moody. you felt like it was probably more likely to happen than the extension for Kaminga, because there was no way that Moody was going to get $200 million, and I don't know if Kaminga will get $200 million, but it is odd because, like, with Moody, a lot of people are big fans of him, but I feel like if that's the case, like, and I'm not saying he's bad at all, but I just feel like his minutes in theory don't seem to quite add up to, in terms of how good or bad he is. And I don't think he's bad, but I do think that, again, it just seems like there's so many guards on this roster. Like, his rookie year, 12 minutes a game, next year, 13 minutes a game, and then last season, 17 and a half minutes a game. Right. So, I mean, like, seems like a good rebounder, solid athlete, solid outside shooter, but it just seems like, but I feel like people were like, thought that his ceiling was higher than it actually is. Like, I never
Mhm.
looked at him as a high ceiling guy. I
Mhm.
looked at him more as like a high floor player.
Mhm.
So, kind of like, even like a Pods. Like, I'm not saying Pods can't be good.
Right.
Or, like an all-star. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily know, like, if he's gonna progress all the way to that level. But I
Right.
think those guys are good enough to where their floor, worst case scenario, is like really good rotational player that could start on some teams, but maybe not necessarily for every team.
Right.
But either way, you got to retain the asset, and you never know. There could be some type of deal that ends up being made, and he would probably have to be in the deal just because, like, the other guys, I don't think there would be as much interest in some of those other players that are kind of like veterans. Like those are players that the Warriors presumably would just want to have as veterans. Whereas the young guys, you could possibly trade them for some better talent right now. But either
Right.
way, no issues with that because it's not a lot of money at all. It's like a pretty reasonable contract.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, so but either way, yeah. Like I said, I think his game is fine. I'm just not, I don't know. Like I said, I don't dislike him at all. I'm just not quite as high on him maybe as some other people. But
Mhm.
I understand, his talent and his skill set for sure. Like, that
Yeah.
can't be questioned.
Yeah.
Um a lot of stuff coming out over the last day or so from a lot of people covering the NBA. Mark Stein mentioned a few things, including Jalen Suggs seeking a $30 million a year deal. So he's going to be a restricted free agent after this season. So we know Jalen Suggs, he has improved every year. Last year he was pretty good. Had a really good postseason as well. Especially in spurts. Obviously he's got some issues in terms of health, but when he's out on the floor, last year he improved immensely as a 3-point shooter. Was an All NBA defense guy. So, and that's probably partly why he's gonna get that money. But it is kind of wild because Orlando isn't quite at that point yet. But soon, right, in the next couple of seasons, they're gonna get to a point where, like, you're gonna have to pay. They've already paid Franz his money, so he's already on a big max deal. Then eventually, you're gonna have to pay Paolo. You're gonna have to pay Jalen Suggs, and that's where we've already seen with the new CBA. There's gonna be some changes, and teams are gonna have to be forced to make decisions that they may not necessarily want to make. So, what do you think about that? Because, I mean, obviously, like we talked about it, like with Kaminga, like, sure, like, you can ask for 30 million a year, but is he going to get it? I don't necessarily know about that, but I mean, I do think he's very good, and I think it would be a mistake for Orlando to let him go because they don't want to pay him. But 30 million is a lot.
Yeah. 30 million is a lot, like you just said. I probably wouldn't be too mad about it if it was
Right.
like 25, but 30, like you said, that is kind of crazy. And I feel like that's a good investment though, because
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Suggs, it's different. And I know in terms of money value and stuff, we're not talking about Moses Moody versus Jalen Suggs or anything like that. But
Mhm.
I think what Suggs brings to the table, like, you kind of know, but then you also
Yeah,
look and you're like, oh, there's a lot of room to grow here, especially when you look back at his college tape and, other stuff that he's done throughout his career. It's just really the
right.
health thing that I think is probably scaring a lot of people. But, I wouldn't be too mad about them doing that. It's probably going to hurt in the moment because you're like, that's a lot of money. But down the line, I think you'll feel
Yeah.
pretty good about it.
And like you said, as long as he continues to improve,
Yeah.
that's kind of the main thing there. Because presumably you're hoping that you're paying for a guy that's going to continue to get better. Because like you said, there's still a lot of room to grow. He improved as a 3-point shooter, but can he improve, his playmaking and decision making? Can he improve on that? Because if he can be a complete two-way playmaking guard, that could even possibly play some point, right? That's going to raise his ceiling. Because again, we already know his 3-point shot has gotten a lot better. We already know his defense is elite,
Mhm.
but can he improve on that? Because that's the main thing that I think Orlando is missing right now. They just don't necessarily have a guy that I think you feel super comfortable about as a table setter in that starting five, and that's where
Mhm.
I think if they could get that, that's where I think they could legitimately challenge for, not saying that they're going to win the title, but I think I would feel a lot higher on how far they could go in the postseason if they had that player that right now they don't really have. I'm still high on them regardless, but either way, Jalen Suggs, as long as they pay him and keep him, that's kind of what you need to do. Like the
Yeah.
worst case scenario is like, oh, this is too rich for our blood, and then and that's
Right.
not going to happen.
Right.
They're gonna pay, I think, I would think, and then keep him. But I've been wrong before about some of this, but I
Yeah.
feel like that's a guy that ideally, if you're Orlando, you can't really afford to lose because
Yeah.
like
Just pay him.
how many guys could you get that are better than better than Suggs that
Yeah.
you could just replace like through free agency? Like that's not happening. And again, because you're gonna have less cap space later on anyway, paid Franz, and you're gonna have to pay the other guys soon,
Yeah.
right?
Just pay him.
Paolo's in year 3, so presumably next offseason he's gonna get his big extension.
Yeah. Just pay the guy. That's all I would
Yeah.
have to say.
So um, also from Mark Stein, Quentin Grimes and the Mavs, a 3-year deal, possible extension with him. Again, I don't imagine he would get a lot of money, right? He could easily be like in the Moses Moody camp, maybe even a little bit less. Because again, his rookie year in New York, right, showed some flashes because he started for them and was a good 3-and-D guy. Didn't have as good of a year last year, but also missed time due to injury. But he's got an opportunity to be a rotational piece for this team. And if he can be, like Josh Green esque, right, where he can be a decent athlete that can shoot threes and space the floor, but maybe shoot the three a little better than Josh Green on higher volume, then I think he could be an even better option because there's going to be games and stretches where you're going to need a guy like that out there to kind of put on some of these other guards. Because I think if you're Dallas, like you're not going to be able to have the whole game having Luca, Kyrie, and Clay, one of those three having to chase guards around. Like
Right.
that's
Right.
just not
Yeah.
be ideal. So that's where, I think this is kind of a no brainer. But I can't imagine he would get that much money because he's not like an elite player, but I think he's a fine rotational piece.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those bang for your buck kind of players where it's like, he's going to give you solid hustle minutes, solid, contribution, on a deal that doesn't handicap you or hurt you at all. It's not like he's asking for an unreasonable amount as far as we know.
Exactly. So we'll see. And then after that, from the New York Post, Cam Johnson on trade rumors. Nets forward focused on Brooklyn heading into the season. We know with the Brooklyn Nets, there's some guys on this roster that may be up for grabs from some teams, right? Because we know the Nets want to be really stinky, really bad, right? So the opposite of some of these other New York sports teams, because they're trending in a different direction. Um, and we've talked about him before, right? Because again, like there's only a handful of guys. Like, yeah, I mean, you kind of start talking about the same guys on the Nets roster that you look at as possible trade targets. But um, and again, I think on a contender, he can be a solid piece. Again, he's a good 3-point shooter. He's got some size. He does have some again injury concerns. But there's no real reason I think for him to continue to be on Brooklyn's roster. So, obviously for him, like, yeah, that makes sense to focus on the now. But, I could see him possibly get moved. It's just his contract is a little bit larger than I think you would expect. And so that's where like it wouldn't shock me if he ended up kind of just being stuck there. Unless a team has like, just $20 million worth of dead money to kind of just give away. But what do you think about that?
I mean, he's a high value guy, I feel like, because, what he's able to do from beyond the arc. And then obviously he's pretty solid defensively as well. So, um, it's just the contract, I think, is a little rough around the edges. But like you said, I feel like he's one of those guys that could probably fit anywhere that can afford him. That's kind of how I would feel. Like he's a plug and play guy, but it's just that
Yeah.
contract a little bit.
Yeah. Here's some other guys looking to also get 30 million a year. This comes from Jake Fisher, Jalen Johnson, as well as Josh Giddey. So these guys, it seems like they're eyeing these 30 million dollar a year extensions. So what do you think about those? Right, because Jalen Johnson, he has improved every year. I think that's the one where I feel like that's more likely to actually be 30 million a year, just because of the fact that for him, he has improved every year, and it seems like the Hawks are very high on him, as they should be. Because there were rumors about like him and Trey are the only untouchable guys. And, that's where, okay, well, if that's the case, then I feel like that's probably going to end up happening where he's going to get, that $30 million a year deal, which again is a lot of money. But I think if you're Atlanta, I mean, again, I don't see, why there's, I don't see why you wouldn't, because I mean, I wouldn't let him walk. And, Atlanta could continue to be a team that has some, other guys getting moved because they have a lot of guys on the roster that, do make more money than you think, but they probably don't need all of them. So I could see like at a certain point, like, yeah, we could move on from this guy making X amount of money and we'll just transfer it over to Jalen Johnson. But the Giddey one, I think he's got to do a little bit more. Although to be fair, he's not going to be on a playoff team. So I think he could easily just put up his regular numbers and still be fine. But I think Johnson is the one that I think for sure will get that big extension.
Yeah, Jalen Johnson, I don't have a problem with that at all because I think you're kind of giving that contract out based on the potential and the room to grow. But then you look at Giddey and it's like, you're good, but can you be great? Can you be $30 million good?
Right.
I don't know right now, and that's kind of where I would be on the fence about that one too.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I like the Jalen Johnson one a lot.
Right. And here's some other guys that may not get the contracts that they're looking for. So Şengün and Jalen Green not offered max deals, right? So according to Shams, those guys will continue to have conversations heading into restricted free agency. So that means that will probably not take hold until next offseason. And then Kuminga and the Dubs are far an extension, which we kind of already talked about. And then Aaron Gordon, right? The Nuggets are unlikely to offer him $150 million. They would like to keep him, but they don't want to offer him, the $150 million, because again, I guess in their minds, right? We already talked about 4 years, $150 million. That's basically $40 million a year. So, I mean, that for Aaron Gordon, even though he's really good, but it's like you're paying Jokic max money, you're paying Murray max money. You're paying Michael Porter Jr. max money. And then you're going to pay Gordon max money. And I don't know if they're going to be willing to do all of that. And that's why I talked about, I think Porter could be a guy, not anytime soon, but if there was like some type of zag that they would make, that could be the guy. But, again, as we talked about, the Kuminga one doesn't surprise me at all. And then honestly, neither does Şengün and Green. Because, I mean, I think those guys are good, but I don't necessarily know if they've proven enough to just automatically get a max extension, especially Green. Because with Green, his increased level of play came during that stretch, but prior to that, he was not very good.
No,
last season during the earlier part, and even before that, right? Like he didn't look like a guy that I would be like, oh yes, let's give $200 million to that guy right now. Şengün looks better, but I think he still needs to kind of probably improve as well, and especially considering that a lot of their best moments last season came without him even being there. So
sure, yeah, I kind of agree with everything that you said, except for Şengün. I think Şengün probably deserves it. I think it's one of those and other ones where it's like you kind of have to pay the guy considering the plus and the positives that you do see in his game. It's just the health and stuff like that, and defense as well. That's another big question mark, I guess.
Right.
But yeah,
and I don't have a problem with paying him. To be fair, I was just saying that like it doesn't surprise me that he hasn't gotten it just yet.
Sure, yeah, and that's where I think it does surprise me because normally you kind of want to lock down this talent while you can, but
right,
it does send out not like a message of like we don't want you, but more of a message like prove it, which is fine. And that can sometimes be a good chip on the shoulder for these guys for them to ball out, especially when it comes to contract years and stuff like that. So,
yeah. Then we had a couple of guys getting signed. Doug McDermott, Dougie McBuckets going to the Kings as another outside shooter. And then Scottie Pippen Jr. getting signed to a 4-year deal basically with the Grizzlies. So, congratulations to him because he was a two-way guy, with the Lakers. And then last year he got an opportunity to play for the Grizzlies when everybody was out. And, he showed he could play. So, and it's a cheap contract. So it's not like you're overpaying him and giving him a ridiculous amount of money. But again, these are rotational things, so we don't have to talk a lot about it, but just putting it out there.
Yeah, shout out to Scottie Pippen Jr., like you said, grinder. We've kind of seen him, throughout the G League. We've seen him all over the place, and I'm glad that
Mhm.
he's kind of finally found a niche, I guess.
Yeah. KD likely to wait for new deal. Durant eligible for $124 million extension next offseason. Again, makes sense. I mean, obviously with his age, you don't want to necessarily pass up on the money, but he's still probably going to be really good. And, for the Suns, obviously you just got to factor in, you just got to wait, right? You just got to wait to see, what it looks like so that way, if the Suns improve and have like a realistic shot at being really, really good, then yeah, like okay, I could easily see like yeah, I'm down to hang around here. But obviously if they take a step back or if they're just kind of the same, you just want to keep your options open. But my assumption is that it probably happens because I do feel like Phoenix did quote unquote enough that he's probably going to be fine there. But again, it still is TBD because they still have to prove it on the court. But, I still think that Phoenix did good given what they had to work with. They had some better off seasons than some other teams you know, that had a little bit easier times to do something.
Yeah, I think it's going to be contingent on can they get out of the first or second round. I think if
Yeah.
they get to the Western Conference Finals, it's a 100% lock. But if they get eliminated in the first round, he's not coming back.
And that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like, we do have to see it on the court. Like I feel like he probably will end up doing it, but at the same time, again, we just need to wait and see because last year I think we all thought that the Suns would be, worst case scenario decent, and not that they were bad. But just I don't think we expected them to go out in the first round. Like I didn't expect them to win the title, but because I picked them to win in the first round, so I don't want to sit here and pretend like I didn't think the Suns couldn't win anything.
Right.
But yeah, but either way, yeah, like I think you're just hoping if you're Durant that the team pans out, got a new coach, got some new faces, got some more organization, and if that pans out, then you should be okay sticking around, right? Not that there's any guarantees, but like it feels like the vibe should in theory be better than what it was, I don't know, 6 months ago.
Right.
Um, no movement on new Jimmy deal. Pat Riley, Butler haven't had a lot of conversation about future with the Heat again. This does not shock or surprise me either. Obviously, people have talked about Butler's mentality going into the season. He's been playing, in the minutes he's played, looks like he's taking things seriously. So we'll see if he's healthy. We'll see if he plays well. I still don't even know if they'll give it to him, even if that happens, because I just feel like with the Heat, how many more years can you really squeeze out of this core? I still think they'll be a good regular season team. I just don't think they'll be able to be good enough to win the title. So, I'm curious to see where that ends, but that doesn't really shock me at all. Like I don't think he'll get personally I don't think he'll get it. But
I don't either.
uh
I think
yeah,
I think that
but
era's over.
hmm
Yeah.
Then moving on, Lakers eyeing Hornet center Nick Richards, a potential trade target amid Christian Wood's absence. I'm getting tired of this as a Laker fan. Like it's from the Athletic. It's getting kind of annoying. You already know how I feel about this many times. I don't know why any of these things couldn't have been done before. I know they don't have roster spots. I don't care. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
you know,
I mean, he's a good candidate, but also like not really. I don't know
yeah,
how
he's mediocre.
like
Like he's okay.
like I'll say
All
this.
right.
He's a good Christian Wood replacement, but take that for what it means. You know what I mean? Like Christian Wood isn't the GOAT or anything like that. He's not like
Right.
an amazing player. But
Right.
I think Nick Richards would for sure be a serviceable Christian Wood replacement.
Is he better than Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes?
No.
You said no?
No.
He's probably better than Jackson Hayes, but he's probably
I don't
not
think so.
better. You don't think so? Like I think like I said, I'm kind of in the camp of like he's okay. Like he's like you said, a serviceable backup center, but like at the same time, like I mean, I don't know. I like
Preferably third
beggars can't.
string.
Yeah, beggars can't be choosers, but like again, um, I don't know.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's just getting kind of annoying. But you know how it
Don't
is.
blame me, yeah.
And then last but not least, Giannis's quote on his future. Greek Freak thinks he could be traded if Bucks don't win title. I feel like he was trolling a little bit, like being kind of funny. Like the quote basically was, quote, yeah, if we don't win a championship, I might get traded. This is the job we live. This is the world we're living in. It's everybody at any given moment. If you don't succeed, that might be it for us. If you don't do a good enough job, you're cut. Or you're out, excuse me. Now, I don't think if the Bucks don't win the title that they're going to trade Giannis. I think it would be a lot more likely that they would trade some of the other fellows on the roster. So that was kind of a bizarre quote. Like I said, I thought he was being kind of funny, but at the same time, again, like if the Bucks don't do much this season, like say like the Suns, right? Like if the Bucks go out in the first round again, or don't make the conference finals, like I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't do something. Like just because from the perspective of like then clearly that means in back-to-back years what you had didn't work. Like you brought in more rotational pieces and you still didn't really do much better. So if that happens, I mean, the only other thing you could realistically do is move one of the other guys. But I don't think you have to trade Giannis. You only do that if he asks out. Not if he, not you're not going to lose and then be like, well, even though to be fair, I guess if you want to quote unquote put blame on him, he wasn't available in the last two postseasons. But I mean, that's not his fault. So it's like, I mean, that's why I think it's kind of a funny quote. But at the same time, I don't see why there wouldn't be any changes if they don't win it again, like, or if they don't come close to winning it.
Yeah.
More
I
so
mean,
than
and
if they,
he's said things like that
yeah,
before in his career where, he's always
right.
hinted at like, leaving or somehow departing Milwaukee, but like you said, I think
Yeah.
he's just trolling.
Yeah, so we'll see. Because his contract, I think, is coming up in terms of, because I mean, I know he signed the extension, but it's something to think about, right? Where it's just you put it in the back of your mind, and then then when something happens, you kind of just remember, like, oh yeah, remember when this was said or when this happened? Like, this might have been the start of it. But he's still under contract until what 2027, 2028 player option, so he's got a minute. But by that point, once you get to 2027, 2028, a couple of those guys may not even be some of those guys may not even be in the league. So, I mean, because then by that point, Lopez will be like what? Like, well, his contract, he's in a contract year anyway. So, then Middleton, I think this is the last year of his deal before the player option. And then Lillard, I think, has 3 years left, with the last year being the player option. So,
Yes, sir.
well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes, and this is the last episode before the start of the regular season. Obviously, the regular season begins on Tuesday. We talked about, the NBA season starting and everything we're excited about, and everything that we're hoping for, things that we might be a little worried about. So, just to kind of, close off, who do you think will win, both of the opening night games, and then, we'll just kind of, end it there and do our usual goodbyes.
I think Boston wins the opening night game.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Interesting.
I know I picked the Knicks to win the finals, but
Yeah.
I think, Boston's they're kind of riding high, and I think,
Yeah.
they've kind of looked apart through preseason. So have the Knicks, I feel like, but regardless, that's kind of how I feel about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the other one?
Minnesota Lakers in LA.
Minnesota takes that one, I think.
Yeah.
Not really like a no-brainer, but I think Minnesota has
Right.
the depth pieces. I think Anthony Edwards goes off. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
it's possible that the Lakers, just have like a crazy night and like,
Especially at
everybody,
home.
yeah, and everybody just has a hot hand and stuff like that. But I feel like Anthony Edwards might spoil that night.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting because, like, now Minnesota doesn't have the two centers, right? So, how does that change in regards to how they're able to kind of slow down LeBron and AD? But I think if the Boston one is funny, though, because a lot of teams tend to lose on ring night, but we started a new streak last season, right? Because the Nuggets won on opening night. And I think the Celtics at home, they're pretty freaking good at home. They don't lose too many times there,
Right.
or not last year. So I think they can pull that off. And then Minnesota, they're pretty good regardless whether or not they're at home or on the road. I mean, Randall, he's only played in one preseason game because of the shoulder, but I think ready to go against the Lakers. But like you said, that one is, I think, a little bit more of a toss up just because of the fact that, like, for one game, right? Like you said, they could get hot at home or something like that. But I do probably lean towards Minnesota. We'll see if the Bronny LeBron moment comes up.
Oh, God.
Hopefully it's not like a situation where they're down 20 in the
Right.
fourth quarter or something like that. So we'll see. JJ Redick's first game as a professional head coach. So
A lot to
a
look
lot of
forward
stuff to
to.
look forward to there.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
new look Knicks, new look Minnesota, same old Celtics. somewhat different Lakers, but we'll see. But either way, regular season starting up. So hopefully everybody's excited. We're not gonna stream after opening night. That probably will come, towards the end of the week. We'll see based off of the schedules and whatnot. But we do hope to probably do some more live streams as we go into the season during the regular season. So continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and continue to help our channel grow. We appreciate all of all of the people that come and join our live streams or comment on our videos. And if you comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video. So we'll see you next episode. And by that point, we'll have some games to look forward to and break down.